true honor and pleasure to be back at KU. I want to thank Dr. Bennett. I want to thank the Tiberti family for this lecture series. I think it's really important. And I talk very fast, so I know at 2 o'clock in the afternoon you might be a little tired, but don't worry. I want to talk to you about what it means to be a leader in engineering. I want to talk to you about what we just heard, that you are growing technical skills right now, which is amazing and important. And the world needs your technical skills. I can say that first and foremost because we've got lots of recs open at Black & Veatch for the skills you all are building. But in order to make sure that the career that you're hoping to have actually has the impact that I hope each of you are looking to make in this world, there's a component of it that I want to share with you around leadership and around impacting the people that you're going to interact with. And so I'm going to tell you 12 things that I hope that you will find useful, and I'm going to tell them in 12 stories. And they'll be really fast because I talk very fast. So as I was reflecting on this opportunity to come speak to all of you, I was thinking about this time 25 years ago. I was just wrapping up my sophomore year at KU, and I was just finishing my sophomore year in the School of Business. And Dr. Molinazzi gave me a call from Learned Hall. At the time, he was the Associate Dean of Engineering. And he said, I would love to meet with you if you don't mind. So I went to his office, and he said, Katie, I was looking through your transcript. You were in engineering for your freshman year. Then you switched to business. Tell me more. I said, oh, Dr. Molinazzi, well, you see, I started in chemical engineering, and I just realized I couldn't see those particles. I'm kind of a visual learner, and it was really hard for me to understand how this was all going to kind of play out. And so I decided to switch. Now, you would have thought I would have learned my lesson with the whole particle thing, but I didn't. I went to electrical engineering, and I did electrical engineering for a semester with some influence from my father, who was an electrical engineering professor here. And again, I did my circuits class, and I thought, this is very abstract for my brain. I'm a learner through visual, and I just couldn't see it. And P.S., by the way, Dr. Molinazzi, if I'm really honest, I was the only female in my class, and many of the men in my class made sure to help me understand that I didn't really belong there. And Dr. Molinazzi said, I don't want you to do anything you don't enjoy, but gosh, we'd sure love to have you back, because you did a really nice job that freshman year. So I'd like you to think about civil. You can see it. You can see the water. You can see how the beam bends. You can see how the concrete sets up. And secondly, we have a much better ratio of female to male, and I think you could make some friends that you could really enjoy along the way. And in fact, that's true. I actually am having dinner next week with many of the females who were in Dr. Darwin's lab with me. And so the first leadership lesson that I learned from Dr. Molinazzi 25 years ago, right around this time of year, is to pay attention to those people who are around you. Pay attention to understand what are their motivations. Pay attention when somebody kind of goes missing for a while. Ask what's going on. You doing okay? Find out from them what are their motivations and see if you can't help connect them back to a purpose that is really what they were made for. I am forever indebted, obviously, to Dr. Molinazzi. It's why I'm here. It's why I have the awesome job I get to have today at Black & Veatch, because he saw me, he reached out to me, he asked what really mattered to me, and he helped me connect to the School of Civil Engineering. So very, very thankful for that. Okay, so I start my journey after I finish up here at KU as a civil engineer, and I went to a small firm first. And after about 4 years, I found my way to Black & Veatch. Black & Veatch is a 10,000 person company across the globe. We do really large projects. I had been used to very small projects, and I got to be on a proposal for a classified client. And we were going to go to the classified client's office to talk through the proposal requirements. And the leader of that project said, let's have a pre-meeting before we go. And I said, okay, great. And we walked in the room, and I was ready to hear about all the technical specs. I was ready to hear about the price it was going to take to win. I was ready to hear about the schedule we needed to build in order to meet the expectations of that client. And I will never forget that day. That leader walked into the room, went right up to the whiteboard, and started drawing an organizational chart. And I was super annoyed, which is going to be the theme of most of my stories. I kept thinking, what is he doing? We don't have time for this. I don't care about that organization. I don't care who's in charge and who sits to the left and who sits to the right. I want to get down to the technical brass tacks. How are we going to win this project? And we spent about 45 minutes him explaining to me who is in charge, but who actually makes the decisions, who likes us and who really doesn't like us, who we want to make sure we talk really strongly about this topic and the one we don't want to talk about with this topic. And it was an invaluable lesson to me. One, I should be more patient and more curious. And two, it's really, really important as we interact with organizations that we think about how the different relationships matter. While we can lay it out, of course, visually in an org chart, it often is more complicated than that. I'm really grateful to have been at Black & Veatch for 18 years because I've kind of mind mapped all the org charts in a way of who likes who and who's worked with who and who understands who and who took that one assignment that one time that didn't go so well, so he never want to work with this person again. Those things actually really, really matter when it comes to project assignments you're going to want to take, when it comes to who you're going to want to work alongside as far as how you're going to build your brand and your career. And so I am forever grateful that day that he did that. And in fact, because he did, and he was very, very good at understanding our clients, we won that project. So we win the project, and it happens to be for a classified client, which generally means they're located out on the East Coast. And it was in Baltimore, Maryland. And so at that point, I was 6 years into my career. I get bored very easily. And we were in a big meeting after they'd announced we'd won it. And someone said, you know, we're going to need someone to move out to Baltimore and help us open up an office in Baltimore. Do you think anyone out there would be interested? Well, I didn't bother to call my husband. I just raised my hand and said, I will take that assignment. A change sounds fun. I would like to move out to Baltimore, Maryland. So when you do corporate assignments, sometimes they decide if it's going to be for your family or just for you. And so they decided this was just a single person assignment. So my family lived in a hotel with me for a year. And we supported the clients out there for a classified client that Black & Veatch had won an award with, which was a great year for my kids and for my family. But before I left, the leaders from my business unit said, hey, you should just have a heads up. One of the folks out there is real hard to work with. Like, nobody likes him. He really doesn't like us. We just can't figure out how to make this guy happy. He kind of has standards that are through the roof. Good luck. Okay, so I pack my kids in our station wagon. We drive out to live in a hotel for a year. And the whole time I'm thinking, I hope I haven't made a huge mistake. And this guy sounds like a lot of fun. So we get out there, and I went to my first meeting with this individual, and he's a hard driver. Folks from the East Coast sometimes can be a little bit harder driving than us Midwesterners. So I listened for a while, listened to him complain about the things we weren't doing right, listened to him tell us how, he wishes we were faster and this and that. And then I said to him, help me understand from your perspective, what would good look like? Like if tomorrow you were happy, what is good gonna look like? And I will never forget, because he said, I just want an S-curve. You just want an S-curve? Perfect. An S-curve is easy. We've been trying to hit all these expectations he had, but in the end, what he was driving towards was an S-curve. So if you haven't done project controls type work, which thankfully I had a rotation before I met him, it's around earned value management. Earned value management is how we make money on our projects. So it keeps us on schedule and on budget. It's kind of that simple. And the reason it's called an S-curve is because it maps out how we think we're going to make money or how we think we're going to burn hours on a project. So with all projects, it starts a little slow, then you work a lot, and then it gets a little slow again. That's why it's called an S-curve. Literally, it just looks like an S. And it takes like 3 minutes to build on an Excel spreadsheet if you know exactly what your client's looking for. When he had put in the contract he wanted earned value management, we were giving him calculations and giving him spreadsheets of data. And all he really wanted was an S-curve. And so we did get a great rating on that project because we boiled it down to, help me understand for you what good looks like. So third lesson is ask that question. Literally find out from people, what is it that you're really wanting? What can good look like? I actually met with a senior engineer this morning. He's really unhappy and he's going to leave. And when I really sat and listened to his story about what good looks like, it was nothing we've been chasing. It's not his salary. It's not his working hours. He wants to pour into the next generation, and we haven't let him make a decision about who we're going to hire. Okay. Can we invite you to the next time we're going to hire a new person, and you can help us find that person you want to mentor? Yeah, that'd be great. So what does good look like? Really listen for that. Whether you ask the question directly or you're just listening as people talk, everyone has that idea in their mind of what good is going to look like. Okay. I'm really lucky that I was here in the early 2000s and I got to learn from Dr. Darwin and Dr. Molinazzi. And so Dr. Molinazzi had all of us take the FE. I don't know if they still take the FE before they graduate. Apparently a lot of schools in our nation don't do that because we have a lot of engineers at BV who haven't yet taken their FE. But Dr. Molinazzi had us all take the FE. So I worked as an engineer doing design work for about 4 years, but then I got into project controls and then I got into project management. And so I thought, I'm not gonna really need that PE. But I'm out in Baltimore, and one of the leaders I was working with out there kind of knew better than me, and he cared about my future. And so he very smartly took me to dinner and took my husband along too. And he said, Katie, look, I know you haven't practiced engineering in like 6 years, and I know you probably are never gonna sit down and do a design or stamp a drawing, but a PE means a lot in our industry, and having that behind your name is gonna tell something to people about what you're capable of. So I would really, really, really encourage you to pause right now in your career and think about studying for that exam and getting those credentials. It'll make a big difference. I did not have time for that, you guys. I was supporting a new client out in Baltimore. I was living in a hotel with 2 little kids. I have met so many professionals who can give me all the reasons that they absolutely do not have time to get their PE. I hadn't practiced in 6 years. But, like I said, he was smart and brought my husband, and my husband was my best cheerleader. So he said, oh, you can do it. I'll watch the kids at night. Don't worry, I'll figure out a way. We'll order the books. You can do this. So I, by then, was good friends with the front desk. So every night we'd get home, we'd grab dinner, and then I'd go to the front desk and say, "Does there happen to be a conference room that's not being used right now?" I'd haul all my books down to that conference room, lay them out, and I'd take practice exams so I could get that PE credential. I have never stamped a drawing, in fairness, but I absolutely believe that me having that PE is a huge part of why I get to be the vice president of engineering at a company like Black & Veatch today. So I would tell you, it's really important to find those folks that you can take advice from. Probably not one single voice, because everybody has a different opinion. Our world is changing really quickly. So it's important to probably triangulate people's input on how they think you might want to do your career, but absolutely listen to the advice of others. I can't tell you the number of people I mentor, and I talk about the importance of getting their PE, and it's, well, not in the next 6 months because my kids are little, not in the next 6 months because I got to have this surgery, not in the next 6 months because my parents are sick, not in the next 6 months because I got this big vacation planned, and I understand. I sat in a hotel conference room every night to study for this exam, and I hadn't practiced in 6 years. So I don't want to say it's not a small task, it's a major task, but find those folks you can get good advice from, and I would really encourage everybody to get their PE. So I get my PE, which is great, and Black & Veatch gives me the chance to be a project manager, which is a really big deal at a company like Black & Veatch, and it's on a huge, classified, big project, kind of post-9/11 security type based facility. Now, the challenge was that the facility already kind of existed and they wanted to do a bolt-on, and they'd already paid another company to do the 30% design. So we were to come in and kind of do the 60%, 90% and see it through construction. Awesome, I'm super excited. I'm pretty young to be a project manager at BV. Don't worry, lots of the more experienced people were making sure I remembered that, probably too young. And our very experienced fire protection engineer comes into my office and says, "I heard you're going to get to lead this project." I said, "I did. Yeah, it's super cool." "Yeah, that project's never going forward." "Okay, say more. Why would this project not go forward?" Fire code won't allow the way that concept design was created. You can't take a 2-story building and bolt on a 3-story building. It's totally against code. And P.S., because of the blast protection that's needed around the corridor of this building, there's no room to do anything different. And P.S., this client's really picky and has very robust square footage requirements. So I don't see a path forward for this project. Okay? I did what any respectable engineer would do, and I went and bought a lot of pizza. And I didn't just buy any pizza. I bought Rosati's pizza. And I took it into the conference room, and I brought our best engineers into the conference room, and I said, "Glenn, tell him the problem." So Glenn explained, this project can't go forward. Here's all the variables that cannot be budged. And I said, "Come on, guys, eat this pizza and tell me how we're going to fix this problem." So we did. We iterated, well, what if? Okay, well, maybe what if? Okay, well, maybe what if? And so when we went to that first project review with that client, we were able to say, "Hey, bad news. The firm you paid before didn't do you right. They laid something out that's not possible. But good news. We have some ideas we think can make it work." And so the next lesson I would think is really important is you got to push for solutions. It is sometimes really easy to say it's just not going to work. And there's a lot of things in this world that are just not going to work. But it's really fun to figure out, but how can we make it work? So buy pizza, push for creativity. I'm pretty sure no one had done that strategy before because they were all taken aback. But let me tell you, they enjoyed that pizza. Okay, this is one of my favorite stories. So we get the project, which is great, and we figure out a solution, which is terrific, and they're really happy. When you do a project with the United States government at that scale, they bring in about 80 experts to a hotel ballroom to review your design at certain milestones. And they are rigorous, and they really enjoy finding what you've done wrong. And so they send you all your review comments in a massive spreadsheet, and then your engineers go through and look line by line at each of those comments. Okay, we'll fix it. Okay, actually, that's not how this is going to work because of this. Line after line after line after line. It's a massive exercise. And these review meetings happened near the project site, which was in a southern state, very far from Kansas City, which is where I live when I had come home from Baltimore. And in order for us to get 80 people, a booklet of this many comments, down to a project site, we would have to finish them probably a week early, right? Our team had to finish up their comments. We have to send them to Kinko's or to our print shop at Black & Veatch to be printed, bound, and then they're put in all these boxes, and then they're shipped to the hotel ballroom where we're going to unpack them and talk these through with the government. Well, at the time, I had 2 little kids, and these project meetings happened pretty frequently, and I hated being away from my kids. And so I worked out an arrangement with Black & Veatch. I said, hey, for the price of my plane ticket, will you just give me that money to pay for gas and I'll drive there. So my kids can go with me, and then my kids can swim in the pool and they can, hang out while I go to these meetings, but at night we can be together and I can try to find some kind of work-life balance. So they said, okay, yeah, we can do that. And here was the benefit to Black & Veatch. Now my project team didn't have to finish those comments a week in advance. They had until basically Saturday to finish their comments, and then I could print them at Black & Veatch over the weekend, and then I could put them in the back of my minivan, and I could drive them down. So win-win. The problem was the building that our federal business was in at the time was super old and yucky. And so there was no light switches that I was aware of. It was that old. I'm still to this day not sure where those light switches had been hidden. They were in some kind of panel that I did not have access to. So there was a little bit of emergency lighting from the exit signs, and that was it. So my daughter at the time was about, 6 or 7 years old, maybe even younger than that. And so we would go to Black & Veatch on Saturday night, once all my team had got the review comments in. We would start at my computer, we'd send those booklets to every floor of Black & Veatch so they would be printed, and then we would walk with a flashlight from floor to floor to floor to gather those booklets up. And I had kind of forgotten about this memory, but my daughter just went away to college, and so while we were talking about school and all the things, she said, Mom, you want to know one of my favorite memories growing up was Black & Veatch in the dark with a flashlight. And I was like, that's great, Jules. I'm really glad that's a positive memory. But my point is, especially as a working parent, is you got to find ways to make it work. We made it fun. Me and Jules have great memories from those times of putting those books together. My team won because they got 3 or 4 more days to pull their comments together, and my family got to be together through all those review meetings, and we sure learned how 16-hour drives between here and the South work. I do think that, again, it's easy to have lots of excuses about saying yes to opportunities in your career, and I would just really challenge you to get creative and say, how can we make this work? What are our options? What are the variables? What things can't budge and what things can budge? I will say, I only had 2 kids then. I have 4 kids now. Those kids don't go on trips with me anymore. I got too old and tired for that, but it was really fun while it lasted. They're a little more flexible than the first batch. So I did project work, and I'm really grateful for all the experience I got to have in our federal government business. And then one day, I got a phone call from corporate HR, which I was not expecting, and they asked if I would help with project manager development. I'd been a project manager for approximately 12 seconds, so I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to add any value to that request, and I thought it was a committee. Silly me. The day I was supposed to meet with HR, my boss took me into his office and said, hey, we know that you're looking at this opportunity and we want you to know we support you. And I went back to my desk and called my husband and said, I think this is a job interview. I went up the hill to corporate and I sat down and they asked if I would come up to corporate and work in HR and build out PM development for Black & Veatch. I have no talent development background. I don't know how humans learn. I had a huge learning curve. But with every opportunity that I've said yes to, whether it was driving out to Baltimore and wondering if I made a huge mistake trying to rally a client who otherwise was pretty unhappy, or saying yes to this huge classified facility that obviously started off on a pretty rough foot, it's okay to be uncomfortable. I was super uncomfortable when I moved into corporate and sat down to try to figure out how are we going to streamline for a 10,000 person company across 12 different continents, supporting 7 different business units, a single way to grow project managers. So I talked to everyone I could think of, which wasn't a lot of people because I came from a really small part of BV, but I grew my network. I documented all my conversations. I looked for common threads and eventually got to present to our executive team on my suggestion. So my slide was very simple. I took all the programs we already had because everyone was doing something. Everybody thought their thing was the best. Everyone had their idea of how we were supposed to solve it. And I put all those graphics to literally come together into one answer, which we called PM Foundations. And I'm really proud to say that that was 10 years ago, and PM Foundations remains a key part of how we grow our project managers today at Black & Veatch. So what I learned through that, it no longer was just easy enough to say what does good look like. In fact, our CEO asked me to meet with him when I got this opportunity to come up to corporate. And I sat down and I did my old what does good look like trick to him. And he pulled out a 3-ring binder and slammed it on the desk, goes, this is how I learned to be a PM. And I was like, don't know if that's going to go over so well nowadays. That's not really how people like to learn anymore. And so my how does good look like had to be switched a little bit to say, okay, I hear the intent of what you're looking for. You want a standard curriculum. That's what I can see from this 3-ring binder. And you want everyone to get kind of the same. And you want top level, kind of top shelf experience. Those things I can thread through this. But let me ask the rest of the business units and all the other leaders here what they're thinking is going to make the most sense for our project managers. So connecting the dots and making sure you have a really strong network is going to be incredibly helpful as you try to solve some of the problems that you might be handed in corporate America. So I got to HR, and I'm going to be honest, a lot of engineers are not super great people leaders. And so until that point, no one had ever had a one-on-one with me, literally. Most of my supervisors met with me once a year to give me my year-end review, which does make you wonder, like, how did they know what to say? We'd only met that one time. But I did not have regular one-on-ones with a supervisor back then. And my boss in HR sets a standing meeting once a week with me. And I was like, what is this nonsense? Who has time for this? I'm not meeting with this guy once a week. It taught me something really important about the value of frequent touch bases, making sure my leaders aligned with what I was looking for, that I could have a set place that I could ask those questions. So when I got done with my rotation in HR and I went to lead our engineers in our data center business, I had become very fond of one-on-ones. And so I set standing one-on-ones with all of my leaders in data centers, and they did the exact same thing. What is this nonsense, Katie? We have no time for this. And after about 6 months, they all said, okay, yeah, this is incredibly valuable. I'm really, really glad we're doing this. And so since I've moved into leading all of our engineers, we have developed a whole process by which every supervisor in engineering has been selected because they wanted the role, not just because we told them they had to do it. And they get a budget to have a one-on-one at least once a month with their professionals. Our attrition rate at Black & Veatch has fallen to the lowest it's ever been, and I truly believe a lot of that is because the folks who are literally leading the frontline professionals have made a priority of making sure they get frequent one-on-ones where we can hear from them and understand what's on their mind. I don't know if you guys have ever read the book Team of Teams, but it was really popular for Black & Veatch in like the right before COVID. And it's written by General McChrystal, and it's all around when we went to war post 9/11, and that kind of the warfare and the methodology of folks in that space was very different than they had been trained on. And by the time you would run an idea up the chain of command and get approval and then run it back down, it was too late. The enemy had already changed their position, they'd changed their tactics. And so General McChrystal talks a lot about having to trust a team of teams, that he couldn't be command and control. He had to kind of teach everyone how to do command and control. And something he talked about that I think is really important is he shared his thinking with the team. And so every morning he would gather up his top leaders and he would talk out loud, even the things he wasn't sure how to solve yet. He'd be candid and vulnerable and honest about, here's how I'm thinking about this, or here's what I'm concerned about, because he needed them to start thinking the way he thought. And so he had to be really honest with them. And so it's not war at Black & Veatch. I don't even want to equate that in any way, shape, or form. It's obviously quite different. But I do love the germ of the idea to say, share your thinking. And so what I started in HR and what I've found different ways to continue is to share my thinking with my team. And so what that looked like when I led a team of 60, when I led talent, which was talent acquisition and talent development and talent management, 60 people, I can't meet with them every day to tell them how I'm thinking. But every Friday, I would record myself talking about what's been going on. So I would share the latest from what I'd heard in corporate. I would do, celebrations for our team and appreciation. Appreciation sends a signal about what really matters and what you really value. I would talk about what's coming up, where I'll be. I would share a little bit of personal. Hey, going to visit a college for Julia. It's going to be great. My team absolutely loved that. We called it the Katie Cast. It's kind of a dorky name, but I would hear from my team like, I love the Katie Cast. Please keep doing the Katie Cast. When I moved into leading 5,000 engineers across the globe, it got a little difficult. Like, that'd be kind of weird if I came in and was like, so I have this thing called the Katie Cast. You can watch it. But what I do is I record myself monthly, explaining where things are at with our engineering, explaining what corporates shared with us that we want to make sure all of our leaders know, and I send that to all of our supervisors. So 800 people get the recording of me rambling once a month. I actually just got back from India last week, and the number of people who say, I love that recording. They don't love it because it's super polished, because it's not very polished. They like it because it's candid. They like it because I'm honest about what I'm thinking about. And they can kind of catch the spirit of the leadership that they're working for and say like, okay, I think if I think about what she said, here's how I think she'd want me to make that decision. So I think it's really important as a leader, whether you lead a huge team or you're an individual contributor, frequent and transparent communication, making sure that you're letting folks know what's on your mind, how you're thinking, so that they can come alongside you and we can all kind of march to the same goal together. Okay, so I left my HR role and I went to lead data center engineering. I don't know anything about data centers, you guys. Talk about a huge switch to something that I had to say yes to and then hope for the best. And it was COVID. So the frequent and transparent communication was important because I had several people I led across the United States who were obviously in isolation, and many of them lived alone. And so we actually met every Tuesday and Thursday morning for 30 minutes, and it was strictly just a, hey, how you doing? No business, just checking in. So I was grateful for that piece that I had established in HR. But I didn't know anything technically about data centers. If you don't know, data centers are primarily electrical and mechanical engineers inside the shell. It's HVAC and it's electrical. So I'm leading mostly folks who are literally older than me. They definitely are technically much, much, much stronger than me. And here I am as their head of engineering. So the first thing I did is I just told them that, which I'm sure was super reassuring. Hey, I totally want to just acknowledge like my career journey has been a little different than yours, and you've become a technical expert, and I respect that very much. My goal is not to tell you what to do technically, nor will I be able to, and I know that. But I absolutely want to make your job work. I want to get things out of the way for you. I want to hear what you need, and so make that my problem. I will negotiate good contracts for you. I'll make sure we get great proposals and win work so you stay busy, which I think is what matters to you. But I want to just be honest that you guys are probably thinking, you don't know anything, Katie, and you're probably mostly right technically. The problem was my boss in data centers was a real hard driver. And he wanted more than anything for that business to grow. And so he would call me on nights and weekends and wanted to know all sorts of things about our projects. And again, like I mentioned previously, not super strong in data centers from a technical perspective. And he would ask me, what does the contract say? We'd have a client mad about something, or a deliverable that was late, or a professional that needed to take a break and we needed to let the client know, or force majeure, or all sorts of things. What does the contract say? And I went to a doctor's appointment for a general checkup, and she said, go immediately to the ER. Your blood pressure is incredibly high. And I was sitting in the ER thinking about this. What is it about this job? I've done jobs that are stressful before. Why is it this one? And I realized it's every time he calls me, he says, what does the contract say? And I feel like I'm always failing him. But then I thought, well, there's like 40 contracts. So mathematically, if I was to just sit and read, just literally read them once, which I would definitely not memorize all the contract terms, that'd probably take like weeks. I wonder if that's what he thinks I'm doing. I think I'm gonna just ask him. And so when I got back to the office, I said, hey, I think you should know that I actually just spent the morning in the ER because my blood pressure was so high. Oh my gosh, that's terrible, why is that? Well, you actually are the reason. Because every time we get on a call, you ask me what the contract says, and I don't know. And I'm just curious, is your expectation that I would spend the next 3, 4, 6 weeks memorizing all of our contracts? Because that's what it would take if I was gonna be at the ready for every question you're asking me. No, oh my gosh, no, not at all, Katie. I'm so glad you said that. That's not my expectation. I'll ask that question different going forward. And so I have used that learning in any role I've taken since then. So there's definitely times when you're in a new role, especially if it's a stretch assignment, that there's something you don't know, or there's a leader you think you're letting down. So I just tell them, I think I'm probably gonna disappoint you on this because I don't think I'm gonna know how to answer that question. Or when I showed up at that meeting and this is how it went, is there something I could have done in advance that would have helped that meeting to go differently? And I have found that my leaders, by and large, are thrilled to help me think about that differently and to not take that on as failure, but instead as, hey, I am in a posture of learning. Is there something I should have been doing differently? And 99% of the time, it's like, no, we would have not thought, you shouldn't have known that. So if you do find yourself getting into a stress position, whether, again, senior level role or an entry level role, speak up. Ask, like, I feel like I should have known that. Is there something that I've missed? Because I bet you didn't need to know that, and we need to help you understand and teach you that. Okay, when I love this story about Black and Veatch because I think it's important, and I love stories about food because I just generally like food. Black and Veatch used to have a thing before I started there where every Christmas they would give each employee a ham, a frozen ham. So this semi-truck of frozen hams would pull up, apparently I've heard this story, and all of our professionals would go, they'd be just handed a ham out of the truck. They didn't get to pick it, they'd be handed one. But then, the fun part at Christmas time was they would all go get in line at the mailroom and weigh their ham. And they would have a whole board of who got the heaviest ham. And it was just fun, right? It was just fun. They loved it. The people who were there, like in the late 90s, they talk about that like it was the most fun Christmas tradition. And then one day somebody, who knows who, said, a lot of hams are expensive. Off the list, no more hams. And it absolutely broke the hearts of these folks. Now, it sounds so silly when you're in leadership to be like, it's $40,000 worth of hams, guys. Like, really? But it was a fun tradition for our professionals, and it really, really upset them when that tradition went away. And we use that story when we teach change management at Black & Veatch to talk about even things we don't think are a big deal can be a big deal to people. When I went into talent development, they were in the middle of a big donut bracket. And so every Friday, they would pick 2 donut shops in Kansas City, and they had literally this massive bracket on a big piece of paper, and they were comparing donut shops, and they were determined they were going to find the best donut shop in Kansas City. Well, we had a lot to do. I don't know if I mentioned, but the CEO was really curious how we're going to do PM development. And so I could have come into that team and said, this is a waste of time. What are we doing? I could have just not participated and kind of helped them feel a little shame for how they're wasting all the company's money and time. But instead, I definitely brought in some good donuts. I feel like I had some good donut options from where I lived. Because it's important for people to feel like their traditions matter. Even if they're small, even if they seem silly, it tells us something about the fact that we belong. It makes us feel safer. It builds psychological safety. It makes us have high trust. I was just in India, like I mentioned. In India, companies have a thing called Annual Day. An Annual Day is a day that the company has basically a massive adult talent show, and our professionals dance and sing, and it's 3 hours long, and it's very loud. And I love participating in it because it means something to them. Their traditions are important to them. So I would ask that you think about the traditions of the people that you work with. If you have Muslim colleagues, being mindful when it's Ramadan and that to not offer them food in the middle of the time they may be fasting. Being mindful of people's traditions and seeing them and all that they are and making sure that we kind of respect that and participate in it when it makes sense for you is a really great way to build belonging and safety. And like I mentioned, I work at a global company, and I have gotten to travel the world. So I just came back from India. We have 2 offices in Mumbai and Pune. I get to go to Southeast Asia every fall, where I visit our offices in Bangkok and Manila. We have an office in Europe. I was just telling Dr. Bennett, that's a really fun one, because I get to go to Glasgow and London, and we have apparently a very nice new office in Spain I hope to get to visit. And while it's really cool to travel the world, that is a very big perk of getting to work at a global company. The thing that I have been most grateful for my time at Black & Veatch is to realize the vast perspectives. I actually started that whole journey here at KU. Obviously, getting to have colleagues as students, fellow students from around the world taught me a lot during my time when I was here. I was at KU during 9/11, so that was an interesting journey to be on with folks who were from across the globe. Obviously, we're living through rough times as it is, and so understanding different perspectives, how people look at the world, how people look at what's happening, is incredibly valuable. But it's not just around global. I actually led a class several years ago where we brought in our telecom business. We had some folks from our telecom business, and we had some folks from our power business, and we were talking about risk management on contracts. And we had each of them kind of get out a Post-it note, write all the risks you can see in this proposal. And then we had them share with each other the risks they found. And it was interesting because telecom business is very different from a traditional power business. And as they read out the risks to one another, one of them, this was the breakthrough moment. I'm so proud of this in my career. One of them said, gosh, what this is teaching me is maybe in the future, we should have a telecom person review some of our proposals because they sure see this different. And that's really the punchline. Is that when you work with people with different perspectives, they just see things different. Not bad, just different, but oftentimes really importantly in a way that you wouldn't have seen. So I would argue getting a chance to work at a company where you get to work with folks from different walks of life, different parts of the world, different disciplines, different solutions that they've supported is a huge gift. Okay, and then lastly, my 12th lesson. So my dad was a professor here at KU. He worked here for most of the time that I was grown up, and a huge influence for me. And right after he taught his last lecture about a year ago, he had a massive stroke and unexpectedly passed away. Now, my dad was brilliant. I'm really proud of who my dad was. He definitely is who inspired me to be an engineer. And when you think about somebody who's really brilliant, he's like the godfather of radars and knew all this. Again, you can tell him technically wasn't really my thing I'm as excited about, but he was really excited about technical strength. But when you stand at somebody's funeral, the thing they're not going to talk about is all his patents. And they don't talk about the way that he designed the most amazing radar system for the United States government ever. They're going to talk about, and what they did talk about, is the questions he asked to make them think. And they're going to talk about the way he made them laugh, and the way he made them feel heard, and the way that he cared for his students, even when they were going through hard things. And so I'm really grateful for that time, obviously incredibly grateful for my dad. But it really is how I wanted to conclude this lecture in his honor, just to say that in the end, I'm so grateful that you guys chose engineering, truly. I lead engineers at Black & Veatch and would love it if all of you would come work for us because we have so much work to solve for this world with our technical skills and our brains and all the things. But your impact will not matter if you don't think about the way you care about people, the way you hear from other folks, the way you incorporate them into the solving of the problems that you're being handed. So with that, thank you for letting me kind of share my perspective, and I would love to answer any questions that you guys have.
Floor is open for questions. Katie, thank you so much for a fantastic lecture.
Thanks for the presentation, and I really appreciate the 12, like really, tight nuggets. So thank you for that too. So my question is a little bit more nuts and bolts about the one-on-ones. And so you talked about a team of 60. You kind of referenced at one point a monthly meeting, and so I just wondered if you'd break that down a little bit more for us of what does a regular one-on-one mean? Is this an hour? Is this 10 minutes?
That's a good question.
Yeah, and what is regular? And anyway, so
Yeah.
appreciate it.
So we did a span of control project in engineering, and so in kind of what I found for best practices, 1 to 6 is probably the max for most of our leaders. In that case, I had about 4 direct reports, and then they had their direct reports that got out to the 60. I try to meet with my team weekly when I was leading that team of 60. I now have 13 direct reports, which is not a best practice, and I am trying desperately to figure out how to fix it, and I cannot solve this riddle, but I'll report back. But I now meet with my team every other week for an hour. I let that be their time. I probably could and should do a better job of framing up some things I need to cover each time, so we're working on KPIs for this year, so I can say, like, how are we doing against that topic? But hour every other week, and then meet with my staff also every other week. So we have touch points at least probably 3 times a month that I would see someone and put my eyes on them for at least an hour. So of course important for topics we need to cover, but also just to check on them. Roles that have a lot of global roles have night calls and morning calls, and I just find that I want to make sure everybody's doing okay. I get worried, our team has a lot of responsibility. There is a ton of work in the engineering industry right now, and so my team's literal job is to provide the staff to do the work, and there's not enough people. So we're kind of somebody's always angry at us. So I want to just always check on them, make sure they're doing okay, and cover off on our bases on that. But yeah, every other week for my team right now, and then an hour every other week as well for a staff meeting.
Hi, so you mentioned that you got your PE, but you've never stamped a project at Black & Veatch. And you said you thought it was still useful to your position as VP of Engineering. I was wondering if you could expand on that. Just tell me what you think it was useful for you, what it taught you, stuff like that.
So I think degrees and licensure is a cheat code for people to know that you know what you're doing, or to appreciate and have a level of respect for your knowledge set. I'll be candid, as a female especially at a company, especially in an industry that tends to be more male dominant, just having that at the end of my signature line tells a story to people, so they don't have to say, does she even know what she's talking about? Mostly yes, I did get a PE one time. Now, I don't work in our technical stuff anymore, but it is quite literally, it's a cheat code to say, I do have an engineering degree, and I did do it enough to pass a pretty hard exam. And so that's why I find it valuable. Now, is that the reason I would tell our professionals to get it? I think there's lots of reasons we need licensed engineers to solve some of our problems and actually and stamp our drawings. But even if you weren't planning it, it still becomes a really nice way to signal to the world that you know what you're talking about and that you've run the gamut to earn your seat at the table.
Okay. So you talked to us about several times you said yes to things that were, it sounded like not necessarily things you were planning for in your career trajectory, that they became opportunities and you said yes to them. Just a week ago, we had someone give advice at the KU Structural Engineering Conference. And it was, it was telling, and because I'd asked the speaker this question, and so they were giving the advice to the students. And it was, corporate or larger companies are going to put you on a career trajectory. And before you say yes to the next step, make sure it makes sense for you and what you want to get out of your career. So how do you decide when to say yes to something? Did you ever say no to anything? And can you walk us through
Absolutely.
some of that?
That's a really, really good question. So I kind of would maybe say a little different than what their recommendation is. I would be really surprised if you're 24 and you know where you want your career to go, or where corporate America is going to be, or your company is going to be in 20 years. So it's a bit of a misnomer to say, I'm only going to say yes to that if you can guarantee it takes me to here, because here may not exist. The role I'm in today did not exist 5 years ago at Black & Veatch, and so I would say your first 10 years, say yes to anything you're asked to do. That would be my advice, is what I did. Like, I had no idea how Black & Veatch worked, what my opportunities would be, but you got to get on people's radar. So I got on people's radar by moving to Baltimore. Like, as soon as we came home from Baltimore, I told my husband, I think that was a good move. It was totally by luck. I just think that was a good move. So especially in those early career days, I would say yes to most things. Again, find your people you can ask advice. Sometimes I've watched a few folks get kind of sidelined into weird spaces, but we tend to try to help them get out of those cul-de-sacs and back on a road that I think makes sense. However, I did hear someone say this, and I think it's really wise. If you are asked specifically you to take a role, generally I would say yes. If it's, hey, there's an interesting opportunity, that's where you can kind of go do a little more learning and saying, oh, this one may not be for me. So that was my first 10 or 15 years, is saying yes to everything, and I'm really glad I did, because I think it got me noticed by leaders who then gave me new opportunities. I have said no lately. So now I kind of get it. I'm like, oh, okay, I see what I'm probably good at, and I know definitely the things I'm not good at. I've got now 4 kids in different stages of life. That means I make some different decisions than when they were little, and I could be a little bit more open to where we might move. I kind of can see now, like, I'm over the hump of the mid part of my career. Like, I probably only have 15 more years to go. And so it's like, oh, okay, what do I want the rest of these to be about? And so there have been a few things that have been asked of me that I said, gosh, I don't think this is the time. I know that's political capital I'm burning. And so I have to be really thoughtful about that. So there's one big opportunity I did say no to, and I have now I've probably used my one no card. So now I'm like, I got to think about what might come next and if I'm going to want to say yes to it. Because I do think when you get into senior leadership, they need you to say yes. They've poured a ton into me. They've let me travel the world. They've put me in leadership programs. Like, I do need to probably say yes unless it's incredibly egregious. And we have good values, so it probably won't be egregious. So I probably should say yes. So that's how I kind of think about it.
Hi, so you've had such an impressive career with lots of changes throughout it. Are there any key takeaways that you could identify directly from your CEAE background, your undergraduate days at all, for those of us who are currently in CEAE?
That's a good question. So I was thinking about this when I was preparing this talk, some of my favorite stories from when I was here. So I have a good one I always tell when I go talk to high schools about my time in Dr. Darwin's class, actually. So when I was in Dr. Darwin's class, he was leading our concrete design, and it was a Friday lab, which I was not a fan of. My daughter actually is studying engineering at another school, and she's like, Mom, the business kids don't have to go to school on Fridays. I was like, it's universal. Engineering does school on Fridays, nobody else does. Our lab started at 2 o'clock on a Friday. I remember me and some of the other people in our group saying, like, do you think Dr. Darwin would let us change this? This is ridiculous. 2 o'clock on a Friday. Who's going to lab at 2 o'clock on a Friday? And we had to prepare, this was obviously a long time ago. So internet, this whole story doesn't make any sense. But we had to prepare final reports on our project. And I had handed my final report. So Dr. Darwin said, I want all of the graphs to be exactly the same. And I want your words to be your own interpretation. So he didn't want to grade 25 different graphs, but he wanted to grade 25 different interpretations of the graph. And so I had given my graph to another person on my team. I'd handed my report, and that person said, I'll turn it in for you, no problem. Great, awesome. And that person had copied a lot of my words. And Dr. Darwin, on our final, had put a statement that said, I did not cheat on the final report, or I did. So I signed I didn't cheat, because I didn't. But that person was honest. And it was I think it was ends of the year and exhausted, and probably went a little further with interpretation than she meant to. So she called me sobbing, like we were about to graduate. She called me sobbing, and she said, you have to come up to school. Dr. Darwin wants to talk to you. And we got up there and we sat in front of, it was me and her and Dr. Darwin. And he said, did you give your report to her to copy? And I did. That's true. And I learned a lesson about how important integrity is. And I think that is something that I absolutely carry with me, because Dr. Darwin was kind and understanding and expected us to fix it, which was fair. But had I done anything else, I don't know what he would have done. He should have said, you're lying, because I know you did, because she told me that you gave it to her. And I appreciated her integrity in that moment to say, like, I messed up. I appreciated that she wanted to take the fall for me. We were good friends. I appreciated that sometimes we make mistakes. But mostly I learned absolutely fess up immediately if you make a mistake. And so I owned it up. She did too. Dr. Darwin was kind enough that we obviously got to graduate and carry on with our lives. We're still good friends. But there's been times at Black and Beach, I actually had it as a 13th item, but I'll give it to you now. There's times you mess up. There's times you're gonna make mistakes. I have definitely spoken up in a meeting of something I was sure of, and then I've gone back to my desk to satisfy myself that I was right and I was wrong. And I make it a point with my team that anytime I mess up, that I call it out first. So I will send an email to an entire meeting of people to say, hey, I wanted to follow up on that topic. What I said was incorrect, and here's the correct thing. And I've had so many people say, that is really awesome, nobody ever does that. But my integrity matters to me more than anything, and I so appreciated the way that Dr. Darwin handled that, and I think about that so often when I make a mistake, is own it. Do not, one, don't cheat, and two, if something goes sideways that was out of, like, just not how you meant for it to go, don't make excuses, just own it. I think that is probably one of my biggest takeaways from my time here and why I'm really grateful to Dr. Darwin.
That lab, by the way, is still 2 o'clock on Friday.
The other lesson I'll tell you guys, I love this story because it absolutely, I'm trying to remember the professor's name, but it was our statistics class, and we were supposed to, I don't remember the circumstances except that we had chosen to test the efficacy of baby diapers, and so we had put like 1,000 baby diapers through some kind of a weighing situation in the lab here. And I was down to the last minute putting the report together, and I had nothing to put graphics on how we had done the scale. Like, I needed to put it all together, and I was in a bind. And so I took out my colored pencils, and I am no artist. And so I drew the scale as best I could with like a little baby diaper, and I did it all in colored pencils, and I was so embarrassed, and I turned it in. And when it was time to pass out the reports at the end of the semester, our professor literally was like, there's one report that stood out among the others because the topic they had chosen was baby diapers, and they had drawn the pictures like a baby. And he thought it was awesome and intentional, and it was just me being a very bad artist. So I remember that being like, yes, of course I meant to do that. I'm so glad that made an impact for you. Yes?
So if I were to make an attempt at connecting the dots of your presentation, I would say that a lot of these lessons were learned by initiating a question and really listening to the answer. So I wanted to know, is that something that sort of came naturally to you, or did you have to be very intentional when you were doing that?
I think what I've learned about myself is I love progress. I am wired for progress, and so I have to be naturally curious because I want to figure out how we're going to solve for things. So I think it's curiosity that makes me then have to pause and listen. I love to get things done. Like, I love it so much. But at scale, when you're working with other people and you're trying to solve really hard, complex, like infrastructure problems, you can't just run and solve it yourself. And so I naturally have to listen because I want them to help me figure out how we're going to solve it, any of the problems. So probably comes out of curiosity and a drive to make progress. That is something as you get older, I think a lot of the leadership programs Black and Beach has sent me to have allowed me to take assessments of myself. And that is something, another reason to say no or yes to opportunities is you get to know yourself better. Like, I know the things details are probably not my best strength. I love standing in front of talking to people. I don't mind walking into a room where everybody's angry. That doesn't stress me out. Like, I actually enjoy trying to figure out how to diffuse. That's something I've learned about myself. There's a lot of things I've learned I also don't enjoy. And so I love figuring out how to make progress. So I'll listen in service to progress.
Katie, you have a great looking family.
Thank you.
And you are really, really busy.
Yes.
And all engineers are really, really busy.
That's right.
So can you tell us how you make time for your family and how you kind of carve out whatever you carve out, what you carve out?
Sure.
And how you do that?
Yes. So the big girls, Julia and Carolyn, are the ones who got to travel with me. They're now 20 and 18. So first 10 years of my career, they went everywhere with me. They got to see the world, at least the United States, when I was working on federal projects. That's how we made that work. And so my husband homeschooled them. So he did the primary caretaking, and they were homeschooled for the first till about 3rd grade. Then we decided to have 2 more children. So family and big family is where I came from, and that really matters to me. And so when we added Gwen and Will, who are now 11 and 10, the homeschooling had to stop because he said, I'm crying uncle, I can't do it all. And so big girls went to public school, and then we added the babies. At that point is when I literally was pregnant with William when I took my HR rotation. So I kind of got off the project track, and I got into more corporate and leadership roles, which still has travel, but it's just not at the same intensity. My husband's amazing. That's mostly how I do it. He does the bulk of the lift. He does the prep for school. He picks them up from school. The other thing that as a mom who has an intense job is that I'm really honest with my kids about things. So there are times when we have a big deadline or a big event that I'm responsible for. And I like to be really honest with them about come September, like until September, Mama's going to be stressed and working late, but it has an end date. Everything that's stressful has an end date. And so I like for them to understand what it takes. I also want them to understand what it takes to have a job like I have, because I hope my children aspire to make the world a better place, and so I let them see glimpses. My son actually last night was sitting with me on the couch watching me do email. You're always in that app, Mom. What's that app? Well, it's email, but it's thrilling. So being really honest with them. Evenings I try to carve out with the kids, so try to do dinner together as many nights of the week as we can. FaceTime makes everything so much better when I travel. Like when I'm in India, they can wake me up in the morning, I can say goodnight to them, so that helps a lot. But really, my secret sauce is my husband. He does a huge part of the lift.
Earlier you mentioned dealing with like large changes in management and also honoring traditions. So I'm curious about how you as a leader or leaders like you with large teams, how you prepare for like expected changes in management as senior teams are leaving. Like how do you prepare the incoming generations to deal with that?
To deal with change in particular and how the world is changing.
Well, more specifically with like management, how like some new manager would work with their team, or even learning the traditions of the company they're going to work for.
Yeah, I think that's where the one-on-ones more frequently become important to hear. Like it's hard in leadership to hear the things when I have 4,500 engineers and technicians across the globe I'm responsible for. It breaks my heart when I hear a leader on my team has said anything that would have not honored someone's tradition, as a for instance. So at this stage, most of the folks that are directly working for me are pretty amazing, so I don't have to worry too much about that. But when there is someone new, listening for the language they're choosing, how they're thinking, people aren't saying bad words, and they're not actually saying anything bad about people, but there is something in the tone and the way you shape your narrative about how you're looking at our professionals that I will keep an eye out for and try to help them think about that differently. If you haven't worked globally, it can be you can lean away from wanting to have to deal with time zones and dealing with folks who English isn't their first language. And so I will listen for some of that I can just kind of hear in their tone and try to help gently correct that and like set them on a different way of thinking about it. I don't like to shame people about the way that they may be showing up, but I do like to hear how they're thinking about it and just challenge them. A lot of times what I will say to my folks is like, gosh, so many things I see you show up for, I can tell your heart's in the right place. Let's just look at this one piece. I think you might want to think about how that might sound to this group of folks. So that's how I will try to guide them, but it takes a lot of time to listen and not just say like, we don't do this. We honor this tradition. It's a little bit harder. I've had folks say, why do we go to India for annual day? It's expensive, it's exhausting. Couldn't our time and money be spent differently? And it's like, no, I'm going to stand on this one. Like, this really matters to our professionals. It's a lot of fun, and it says something to them about how important their office is to us, that their traditions are beautiful. I will sit for 3 hours and watch music that I'm not familiar with and skits that aren't in English, because these are amazing people who work really hard for us, and they deserve 3 hours of our time one evening to see the things that matter to them. So I will try to kind of steer the language and the mindset to help everybody just get their head around it a little differently.
So as a parent to children in our kind of 4-year class, you have some insight into who we are as people and as engineers. What do you foresee or just expect to be this class's greatest struggle, or even what might this class of engineers, both civil, arch, enviro, and even into the other disciplines, what do you expect us to have as shortcomings in our career? Or where do you think we might fall short as professionals?
It's an interesting way to phrase where you guys, I think some of the challenges I've watched your generation have to overcome, obviously, is COVID. The other thing that my generation, which I know I'm 2 generations removed from you guys, and you probably think I'm a dinosaur, but we didn't have my kids go through active shooter drills. We didn't do that when I was in school. So I think you guys have had to take on some realization of your own mortality that my generation, we were fat and happy until 9/11 happened, if I'm honest. We didn't expect to have to endure any of that. And so that can be turned to saying I'm kind of fatalistic and who cares? What's it all about? Or it can be I want a better world. And so my girls, I think, have that kind of outlook of okay, well, I want something better for the next generation. And so I hope that's how you guys have taken those experiences on board to say, I've been given some skills, I'd love to kind of apply those in a meaningful way. So that's one piece that I've observed about my girls that I think is something my generation didn't have to deal with. The other is, where's technology going to take us? And I won't stand in front of you and say that I know the answer for that. I don't think it's as scary as I can see some of the memes out there saying it's going to take all of the jobs. I don't think it will, but I absolutely think it will require us to be better about how we interact from a human perspective. That's why I drove out here in the middle of my office day to tell you guys this, because I really believe it. And I do think the use of social media, and I mean, believe me guys, I love my Instagram as much as the next guy, so I'm not trying to dog on social media, but some of those interpersonal skills that would have been developed in the 90s, because literally when I called people's houses, I had to talk to their mom. Like their mom answered the phone, and I had to say, is Jennifer home? And then I had to talk to another adult. Like, I know that gets a lot more uncomfortable if we can just call each other's cell phones or we can text. So I've watched for my girls, some of the things I've had to help them think about is like, Carolyn, my daughter, wanted to quit her job the other day, and she was like, I don't know how you do that. Like, okay, no problem. But if you don't have, I mean, like, I'm obviously kind of bossy. I really like things to make progress, so I'm happy to help her solve that. But I'm like, man, if you don't have someone in your life to kind of help you think about some of those interpersonals, that's going to be the challenge. So if I was early career, I would want a mentor who's honest with me about my interpersonal skills. And where do I need to stop doing things, and how might I have that, shape that email or have that conversation? That to me is going to be the hurdle, just because you guys have had text and social media. It's just been a very different upbringing than the folks like me that you're going to interact with that didn't have that when we were young.
Everyone, we are at time. Please join me in thanking Katie Schultz for a